questions by the host, and they said, I don't know. Sorry.
You know, usually with Zoom, you'll get like a little message that people are in the waiting room and you need to let them in. But
oh yeah, it did, but I cannot access.
Huh.
I don't know. Keep waiting. I did screenshot and share it with Ngọc.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thầy ơi,
So thank you so much. Anyway, we are here. Thanks.
Dạ. Dạ, chắc là mình bắt đầu ha, chị Ngọc.
Hi Victoria, should we start now?
Yeah. That'd be great.
Nhiệt liệt chào mừng quý thầy cô, các nhà nghiên cứu cùng các anh chị học viên sau đại học đã đến tham dự khóa tập huấn từ nghiên cứu đến công bố quốc tế ngày hôm nay. Trước khi bắt đầu phần khai mạc khóa tập huấn với nhà xuất bản Taylor & Francis, ban tổ chức xin lưu ý với quý thầy cô, các nhà nghiên cứu và các anh chị học viên sau đại học. Nếu quý thầy cô và các anh chị muốn nghe trực tiếp bằng tiếng Anh từ giảng viên tập huấn, thì vui lòng click chọn vào cái phòng ngôn ngữ ở phía dưới góc phải màn hình máy tính chữ Interpretation. Nếu thầy cô muốn nghe tiếng Anh thì mình chọn tiếng Anh, còn nếu thầy cô muốn nghe bằng phiên dịch ra tiếng Việt thì có thể cô sẽ click chọn ngôn ngữ bằng tiếng Việt. Cảm ơn sự lưu ý của quý thầy cô và các anh chị. Kính thưa quý vị lãnh đạo, quý thầy cô, các nhà nghiên cứu cùng các anh chị học viên sau đại học kính mến. Lời đầu tiên thay mặt ban tổ chức, trân trọng cảm ơn quý thầy cô, các nhà nghiên cứu và các anh chị học viên sau đại học đã tham dự khóa tập huấn từ nghiên cứu đến công bố quốc tế ngày hôm nay. Hiện nay bên cạnh công việc giảng dạy thì nghiên cứu khoa học và công bố quốc tế không còn là lựa chọn mang tính cá nhân của nhà nghiên cứu, giảng viên, học viên sau đại học, mà là một nhiệm vụ mang tính tất yếu, thậm chí là sống còn đối với các cơ sở giáo dục đại học. Tuy nhiên, để có một công trình nghiên cứu được các tạp chí quốc tế có hệ thống bình duyệt chấp nhận xuất bản, phụ thuộc rất nhiều vào các yếu tố, tính mới trong công trình nghiên cứu, xu hướng của tạp chí, nội dung công trình, khả năng diễn đạt về văn phong, ngữ pháp, mẫu câu, từ vựng bằng tiếng Anh trong việc trình bày dữ liệu khoa học và đặc biệt là đạo đức nghiên cứu của tác giả, vân vân. Đặc biệt đối với các tạp chí uy tín thuộc danh mục ISI, Scopus, Scientific thì các yêu cầu này đòi hỏi càng cao. Với mục tiêu cải thiện và nâng cao kỹ năng công bố các bài báo khoa học trên các tạp chí quốc tế, đặc biệt là cho đội ngũ cán bộ nghiên cứu, giảng viên và học viên sau đại học, Phòng Đối ngoại và Quản lý khoa học cùng với Thư viện Trường Đại học Khoa học Xã hội và Nhân văn, Đại học Quốc gia Thành phố Hồ Chí Minh phối hợp với Trường Đại học Nguyễn Tất Thành, Tập đoàn iGroup và nhà xuất bản Taylor & Francis tổ chức chương trình tập huấn từ nghiên cứu đến công bố quốc tế do nhà xuất bản Taylor & Francis trực tiếp giảng dạy. Chương trình tập huấn bao gồm 2 khóa học diễn ra trong 2 buổi như sau. Khóa thứ nhất, nền tảng về xuất bản, thời gian từ 14 giờ đến 17 giờ ngày 28 tháng 6 năm 2022 do tiến sĩ Victoria Babbitt, Giám đốc Researcher Development and Outreach thuộc tập đoàn Taylor & Francis Group giảng dạy. Khóa thứ hai là đạo đức xuất bản, thời gian từ 14 giờ đến 17 giờ ngày 29 tháng 6 năm 2022 do tiến sĩ Sabina Alam, Giám đốc Publishing Ethics and Integrity thuộc tập đoàn Taylor & Francis giảng dạy. Tham dự khóa tập huấn ngày hôm nay, ban tổ chức xin trân trọng giới thiệu các quý vị lãnh đạo. Về phía Trường Đại học Khoa học Xã hội và Nhân văn, Đại học Quốc gia Thành phố Hồ Chí Minh, xin trân trọng giới thiệu tiến sĩ Lê Hoàng Dũng, Phó Hiệu trưởng nhà trường. Tiến sĩ Trần Anh Tiến, trưởng phòng đối ngoại và quản lý khoa học. Tiến sĩ Phạm Thị Bích Ngọc, Giám đốc Trung tâm hỗ trợ công bố quốc tế và phát triển dự án. Về phía Trường Đại học Nguyễn Tất Thành, ban tổ chức xin trân trọng giới thiệu Phó giáo sư tiến sĩ Trần Thị Hồng, Phó Hiệu trưởng nhà trường. Xin trân trọng giới thiệu Phó giáo sư tiến sĩ Bạch Long Giang, trưởng phòng khoa học và công nghệ. Xin trân trọng giới thiệu tiến sĩ Nguyễn Hữu Thuần Anh, Phó trưởng phòng khoa học và công nghệ. Về phía tập đoàn iGroup, xin trân trọng giới thiệu ông Trí Nguyễn, Giám đốc vùng đại diện công ty iGroup tại Việt Nam. Về phía chuyên gia giảng dạy, xin trân trọng giới thiệu tiến sĩ Victoria Babbitt, Giám đốc Researcher Development and Outreach thuộc Taylor & Francis Group giảng dạy. Đặc biệt, ban tổ chức xin nhiệt liệt chào mừng với sự có mặt của gần 300 thầy cô, nhà nghiên cứu, học viên sau đại học đến từ Trường Đại học Khoa học Xã hội và Nhân văn, Đại học Quốc gia Thành phố Hồ Chí Minh, Trường Đại học Nguyễn Tất Thành và các trường đại học khác trong cả nước đã nhiệt tình tham dự khóa tập huấn ngày hôm nay. Dạ vâng, kính thưa quý thầy cô, các nhà nghiên cứu và các anh chị học viên thân mến, với tư cách là đơn vị phụ trách chính chương trình tập huấn, xin trân trọng kính mời tiến sĩ Lê Hoàng Dũng, Phó Hiệu trưởng Trường Đại học Khoa học Xã hội và Nhân văn, Đại học Quốc gia Thành phố Hồ Chí Minh có đôi lời phát biểu khai mạc khóa tập huấn. Xin trân trọng kính mời thầy.
Thank you, Miss Han, for the kind introduction. A very warm greeting from the University of Social Sciences and Humanities, Vietnam National University, Ho Chi Minh City. Dear Dr. Victoria Babbitt, the Director of Research and Development and Outreach of Tyler and Francis. Dear Mr. Trí Nguyen, the Regional Managers of the iGroup Asia Pacific Limited. Dear Professor Trần Thị Hồng, Vice President of Nguyễn Tất Thành University. Dear professors, scientists, graduate students from various institutions, including the University of Social Sciences and Humanities, Nguyễn Tất Thành University, Ho Chi Minh City University of Culture, Đồng Tháp University, An Giang University, Bạc Liêu University, Saigon University, University of Accounting and Finance, and other institutions throughout the country. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, on behalf of the Board of President of the University of Social Sciences and Humanities, Vietnam National University in Ho Chi Minh City, the organizing committee, we would like to say thank you very much to the Taylor and Francis Publishing House, the iGroup, and Nguyễn Tất Thành University, as well as the college from both institutions, the University of Social Sciences and Humanities, especially the coordination among the External Relation and Research Affairs Office, the USSH Library, and the Advisory Center for Publication of our university for your tireless effort, great support in coordinating, designing, and organizing this interesting
Recording in progress.
program. And we hope that the courses, which last for about 2 days, this one continue with the previous one, which were successful, will continue to provide the participant, especially those who may not be very clear of their international publication path, with updates in the background knowledge, with timely support, with different kind of issue and things to help you stay current and updated with the global trends in the field of international publishing. This course, this program will continue help develop your publications with greater confidence and with higher quality, hopefully. And such kind of courses will guide you through the process, help us to understand more, explore more about our opportunity to publish our research finding and papers in prestigious journals in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, in this field, when we promote the international publication, in the recent year, we have witnessed a very sharp increasing of the very important number of publications from different institutions, especially in the context of Vietnam. And specifically for the Vietnam National University, Ho Chi Minh City, we have seriously identified that quality improvement as well as the international integration in scientific research as an important goal in our strategy and our strategic planning. In the recent year, we have set the annual goal of increasing the number of publication per PhD holder as well as the PhD student. Hopefully, specifically for the University of Social Sciences and Humanities, we hope that we can reach our target of 3 times increase of publication, international publication by the year 2030, as compared to the last 5 years. So we hope to increase at least 3 times. Okay, and we know that regarding the research in humanities and social sciences, we encounter a number of difficulties in the recent year. Although we witness a good number of increasing of paper publication, but the majority of them tend to be from the natural sciences, from engineering, from other majors other than social sciences. So this is the great effort of our institution as a member of the VNU system, and in cooperation with the Nguyễn Tất Thành University, we come up with this very interesting program. As mentioned by Ms. Hằng earlier, in order to have a quality publication, we need to ensure the quality of the paper of our journal article. We need the support in terms of the language, and hopefully that is English as a medium of communication, of the transferring of the idea. And we need time, preparation, we need financial support as well. So among those difficulties, we know that in terms of the agenda for the researcher, for the participant, we continue to provide more kind of support in different way and in different form. So hopefully the 2 training courses this time and the previous one, and hopefully in the future that you attend today, will continue giving you some kind of solution to such a kind of difficulty. Regarding the direction for our development, the university, the USSH, has recently signed the MOU and the MOA with Taylor and Francis Publishing House, concentrate so much on the areas such as enhancing the capacity of our researchers in academic, in the knowledge transfer, as well as the other kind of academic exchange, improvement in international knowledge sharing, and improvement of the quality of publication, as well as other issues that might be further discussed between the 2 organizations. And today we are happy to share with you the good news that after 6 months of working very hard by the Advisory Center for Publication and Project Development of our institution, we have successfully supported a good number of scholars from our institution with the support of the other as well. We have come up with 12 articles submitted and hopefully accepted fully in the Q1 scopus in that journal. So that is a good sign of our program, of our progress. So hopefully with such kind of good news, specifically we have very good Scopus Index IOP conference series on Earth and environmental science. And at the same time, we will try our best to continue provide more assistance and support to the participant, to the scholar, to the instructor and scientist. Hopefully, first of all, from the USSH. And if we need more advice, then you can consult the COPE Center for further advice. And if you are from other institutions, so such kind of initial success provide some kind of significant impetus for all of us, for our partners, and especially for our speaker as a kind of motivation for her to and for them to share with us more experience and more inspiring stories about how to publish our paper in the well-known international journal. So hopefully you will have very fruitful, very successful participation during these sessions of the 2-day workshop. And finally, I would like to wish all of you a very good health and great success in all fields of your work, your life, and especially in your publication. Thank you very much.
Cảm ơn tiến sĩ Lê Hoàng Dũng. Và ban tổ chức cũng xin trân trọng giới thiệu với sự hỗ trợ đắc lực của bà Ly Bui, giám đốc khu vực của Thelon Francis, đã có những cái đóng góp rất là quý giá cho cái sự kiện ngày hôm nay. And with great support from Miss Ly Bui, Regional Manager from Thelon Francis to contribute value effort for this event. Tiếp theo chương trình, xin trân trọng kính mời Phó Giáo sư Tiến sĩ Trần Thị Hồng, Phó Hiệu trưởng Trường Đại học Nguyễn Tất Thành, đại diện đơn vị đồng tổ chức khóa tập huấn có đôi lời phát biểu. Xin trân trọng kính mời cô.
Thank you, Ms. Hằng. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the international training from research to international publications. This international training is co-organized by the University of Social Science and Humanities, Vietnam National University in Ho Chi Minh City, Nguyễn Tất Thành University, and Taylor Francis Publishing House. I would like to thank our partner to giving us the opportunity to jointly organize this training section. With the objective to improve and enhance the skill for public scientific articles in prestigious international journals, especially in the field of social science and humanities of Taylor Francis Publishing House. I think our teacher will recap many benefits for themselves. Okay, look at the number of participants in this seminar. We can see that, okay, the people, the teacher, they are very interested in the topic. That's Dr. Victoria Baptist and her college will introduce to our teacher. And I think that after this training, I hope that our researcher, they will have more articles and more success in the publication. I think that all the things I want to say, Dr. Lê Hoàng Dũng, he already said, so I will not repeat what is he already said, and I just say that thank you very much to our partner, to Dr. Victoria Babi, to the Dr. Hoàng Dũng from University of Social Science and Humanities, Taylor and Francis Publishing House, and thank you to all the teachers and students who participated in this training section, and I wish you have a greater success. Thank you very much.
Xin chân thành cảm ơn Phó giáo sư Tiến sĩ Trần Thị Hồng. Trước khi bắt đầu khóa tập huấn, thay mặt ban tổ chức, kính mời quý thầy cô, các chị trong ban tổ chức cùng bật camera để ban tổ chức có thể chụp hình làm lưu niệm và cũng là lưu minh chứng báo cáo kết quả tập huấn sau này ạ. Dạ, xin kính mời quý thầy cô vui lòng bật camera. Xin mời đội kỹ thuật hãy chụp tấm hình của ban tổ chức ạ. Xin lỗi tất cả thầy cô mà tham dự, nếu mà không ở trong ban tổ chức thì sẽ không tự bật camera hoặc bật cam được. Xin thứ lỗi cho cái sự bất tiện này. Dạ, các thầy cô bật lên hết chưa ạ? Chị Thuần Anh ơi. Chị Thuần Anh.
Dạ có em chị. Sao chị?
Dạ rồi. Vâng ơi, Vâng chụp hình nha Vâng. 1, 2, 3, smile. Dạ, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Trước khi bắt đầu khóa tập huấn thì ban tổ chức xin lưu ý một lần nữa đến quý thầy cô, các nhà nghiên cứu cùng các anh chị học viên sau đại học, đặc biệt là những thầy cô mới vào sau đấy ạ. Nếu thầy cô nào mà muốn nghe trực tiếp bằng tiếng Anh từ giảng viên tập huấn thì chúng ta sẽ list chọn cái phòng ngôn ngữ ở phía dưới góc phải màn hình, interpretation ạ. Mình sẽ chọn cái nút English. Nếu thầy cô muốn nghe bằng phiên dịch bằng tiếng Việt thì chúng ta sẽ chọn nút tiếng Việt. Đồng thời quý thầy cô có thể tải tài liệu tập huấn trong link đã được ban tổ chức dịch sang tiếng Việt và gửi trong hộp chat box Trong quá trình tập huấn này, nếu thầy cô có bất cứ câu hỏi gì dành cho diễn giả thì vui lòng gõ vào hộp chat để ban tổ chức tổng hợp và gửi cho diễn giả phản hồi của thầy cô sau phần trao đổi thảo luận. Cảm ơn sự lưu ý của quý thầy cô và các anh chị. Và sau đây, không để cho quý thầy cô và các anh chị cùng chờ đợi lâu hơn nữa, xin trân trọng kính mời tiến sĩ Victoria Pabit bắt đầu nội dung đầu tiên của khóa tập huấn ngày hôm nay, nền tảng về xuất bản. Xin trân trọng kính mời cô.
Victoria, it's over to you.
Okay, great. Let me just load my slides here. Are you able to see my slide deck? Right. Well, thank you very much for that nice introduction, Vice President Dung and Vice President Hong and Ms. Hang. It was really interesting to hear your ambitions and inspiring to hear the ambitions that you have for the university and for the publication goals. And the challenges you experience are challenges researchers experience across the globe. It's a very competitive landscape, which we'll talk about a little bit today. I'm very pleased to be here with all of you, albeit virtually. I wish I could be there in person. So welcome, everyone. For the next 2.5 hours, we'll be discussing the fundamentals of publishing in academic journals from the perspective of publishers and editors that we work with. And we'll be covering a lot of ground today, but hopefully you will find it useful. So just a bit of background to let you know who you're listening to today. As said, my name is Victoria Babbitt, and I'm the Director of Researcher Development and Outreach at Taylor & Francis, based in Stockholm, Sweden. And my role involves creating programs to support authors, editors, and other groups involved with academic publishing. I've been working in academic publishing for about 15 years, and for the majority of that time, I was managing academic journals, so working with editors and scholarly societies who own the journals. And most of the journals I worked with were based in Scandinavia and fell within arts and humanities and social science, although I did work with some journals in the natural sciences as well. And then prior to joining Taylor & Francis, I was a postgraduate researcher in geography at the University of Washington. So my research focused on migration and human trafficking. So today I'll bring insights from both my many years of experience in academic publishing and my background as an early career researcher. And as said, today we will be covering quite a bit of material. However, we will be doing a few polls and exercises throughout, so you won't just have to listen to me the entire time. Also, at the end of each session, I'll pause momentarily for any questions related to that session or any comments you might have. And please feel free to write your questions in Vietnamese if that's more comfortable, because we have people on hand that will do the translation for me. Exploring the publishing process from the point of communicating your research findings to post-acceptance of the article. And when it comes to questions, don't be shy. If anything's unclear, or you don't understand something I've said, please ask for clarification. Publishing can be surprisingly complicated, so don't feel embarrassed about asking any questions. And here's our agenda for today. So we're going to start with a brief introduction to the publishing landscape, and then we're going to talk about the elements you need to take into consideration when preparing your manuscript. We're going to talk a bit about writing an abstract and titles and keywords. And then we're going to spend some time talking about the factors you need to take into consideration when choosing a journal, including open access. We'll then move on to materials that you might need to submit, peer review, and then we'll talk about what happens after acceptance. Before we get started, I'd just like to ask all of you to log on to Mentimeter, the web address is right there. And I suggest that you open up a new window on your browser, or you can use a smartphone or a tablet. It works well on those as well. And then you want to keep Mentimeter open throughout the session, as we'll be using it a few times. You'll be asked to put in a code. The code is right there, 322-1752. And perhaps somebody could write that in the chat just in case people join later and need to find that information. That would be really helpful. Right, and so we're just gonna test Mentimeter right now. I'm gonna pop out of here and move to Mentimeter. Again, there's the information. And what I'd like to do is just do a little trial question here and have all of you answer this first question, just to make sure that you can get onto the website. So we'll just pause here for a second to allow people to answer this question. What is your favorite pet? Cat, dog, or neither? Maybe you like birds or reptiles. Lots of dog lovers here. Seems that the dog lovers are still winning out here. And if you are having any problems logging onto the site, perhaps you can put a note in the chat. All right, well, it does look like we have more dog lovers than anything else on the call today. We will be coming back to Mentimeter, as I said, so you'll get a chance to answer the next question. But I think to keep to time, we should probably move on. So great, let's get started. We're going to begin today's session with a look at the international publishing landscape and give you an understanding of the environment you're entering when you embark on getting your research published. So again, we're going right back to Mentimeter because I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on publishing. So, whoops, sorry. So let's go back to Mentimeter. And I'd like to hear to what extent you agree with the following statement. So the first statement is, I have a lot of experience with publishing, followed by, I find the publishing process intimidating. And then we have, I find the publishing process confusing. So you can just rank those based on whether you strongly agree or strongly disagree. So it looks like a few of you find the publishing process confusing, which I completely understand, and intimidating, which I also completely understand. And hopefully today's session will help demystify the publishing process a bit so that you feel a little bit more confident and you actually understand the different steps you need to take to be successful in publishing. And there are a few of you with a lot of experience in publishing, but hopefully still there will be a couple points I make today that you'll find useful. Great, seems to have stabilized there. So we'll move back to the talk. Great. So a little bit about the publishing landscape, and the statistics I'm sharing with you today are from a report that came out a couple years ago, so they're actually a bit out of date, that was put together by the industry body that kind of does an analysis of the landscape. So there are approximately 10,000 publishers in the world today, and of those 10,000 publishers, 5,000 are indexed in Scopus. And those publishers are putting out over 33,000 active English language peer-reviewed journals. And there's also another kind of 9,500 plus non-English language peer-reviewed journals. And this number has traditionally grown year by year by about 3%. So we see the introduction of new journals each year. But we are seeing the number of new journals decline slightly in recent years. So it seems that we've kind of reached the point where most of the subjects are being covered by journals. Now, these journals are publishing over 3 million articles per year, and that number has traditionally grown by 3% year on year. However, the growth rates for new articles has accelerated in recent years to about 4%. And during COVID, especially in 2020, we saw that percentage increase spike quite a bit. So the growth that year was well over 4%. Now, much of the growth is due to an increase in research and development spend on the parts of governments worldwide. And that investment supports the work of anywhere between 7 to 9 million researchers, depending on how you define researcher. So it's a very busy landscape. And before we move on, I want to go back to Mentimeter. Don't worry, it's not going to be back and forth with Mentimeter the entire time, but I just want to hear from you about why publishing is important to you. So just write down 1 or 2 words about why you feel publishing is important. It could be your career. It could be that you want to make a contribution to the literature. It could be any number of things. There's definitely no right answer here. So career, yeah. Publisher perish, yeah. Oh, that's good. Passion, PhD, yep. Contribution, KPI, career development. It relates to teaching, fantastic. Promotion, reading. Career still is very central, but I suppose with career, all of these things relate to your career. Test my limit, that's a great one. Sharing knowledge. Ability in doing research, academic life. Required for PhD, promotion. These start to move around too quickly to read, but it seems like the main ones are KPI, career, PhD, and contribution. Fantastic. Great. All right. We're just going to pop back to the presentation again. It seems to be kind of settling on those ones. Wonderful. Thank you. So publishing is an integral part of the researcher's life, and it has become increasingly important in recent years as a measurement of productivity. But with all of the pressure to publish, which came up in the comments there, it's important to remember what role publishing plays. Originally, the main reason people published was to share their findings with others in their field. And this was the way people shared their findings was in the form of letters exchanged between researchers. And over time, these letters were gathered together and published and turned into journals. Publishing allowed the findings to be validated and to establish provenance, that these ideas belong to someone, and it established a version of record. So believe it or not, researchers at that time were also worried about someone stealing their ideas. Now today, publishing serves other purposes. In the past 10 to 20 years, publishing has begun to be used as a metric built into PhD programs where students need to publish to receive their degrees, as well as annual assessments of faculty. Promotions are often based on how successful academics have been in getting their work published, which came up also in that Wordle. In some institutions, there are bonus programs for publishing based on the ranking of the journals that someone has published in. So for example, in economics, some institutions give financial bonuses if one of their faculty is published in one of the top 10 journals listed in the annual Financial Times list. So different institutions have different schemes that they've developed. And then lastly, many academics talk about the role of research and publishing in their teaching, which also came up in the Wordle. Including research projects they're currently engaged with in their seminars and lectures can give a richness to the experience, and in turn, it can help them develop the research and writing further. And for students, seeing the research and writing process in action can be inspiring and provide more tangible and exciting examples to the curriculum. So much more inspiring experience for the students as well. And the publishing process involves many different steps, each requiring its own strategy. And we'll cover each of these steps today. But what's important to keep in mind is that you should have an overall strategy that informs each of these steps. The first step is the pre-submission, which involves the research and writing process. And this stage should also involve as much quality assessment as possible, ensuring the article is in the best possible shape prior to submission. And we'll spend a good deal of time today discussing the next stage, which is journal selection, because it's the #1 reason why articles are rejected. So choosing your journal is really, really important. The submission process involves a number of elements and is often where problems can be introduced to the process. So authors need to pay attention to all of the details and requirements at that stage. Peer review is the most laborious part of the publishing process, apart from writing the article. This is the main quality check for the manuscript. And then once the article is accepted, it will move to the production department at the publisher, where they will prepare the article for publication and make certain that it's indexed correctly. And then lastly, there's the post-publication process, which involves making sure people actually read your work. Attention to each part of the process is crucial, as each step feeds into the next one. The more attention and care you give to one step will guarantee better results in the following step. So I'm just going to pause here to see if there are any questions on the first little introduction to the talk today. So a little bit about publishing's history and the role it plays and the different steps in the publishing process. Doesn't look like there's any questions. So I will move on to the next section. Right, so today we don't have time for a writing workshop, but we do have some guidance concerning how to prepare your manuscript for publication. One of the challenges authors have, especially those who are just starting out, is communicating the research findings in a manner that is accessible and in line with how most researchers in their field present their research. In fact, when we talk to editors, they say one of the top reasons articles are rejected is because peer reviewers and editors determine that it's not a true journal article. So what do they mean by this? Well, it could be that what has been submitted to the journal is more similar to a condensed thesis or a book chapter. So it's covering too many different points. It might be unfocused or lacking the structure of a journal article. Or it's too journalistic. So more of an example of public scholarship. Basically, the piece of writing is not a journal research article in terms of either the structure or language, or possibly a combination of both. So before you begin investigating possible journal options for your work, it's essential to spend time understanding your current project and the audience you would like to reach. First of all, what are you hoping to achieve with your research, and what role does publishing play in your goals? Are you hoping to change a current practice? Are you hoping to influence policy? Are you interested in educating the public? Are you hoping to make a contribution and push your research field forward in some way? When you write, you're often writing with a particular audience in mind. It may be fellow researchers or practitioners or the general public. There's no right or wrong answer, and it's probably going to change depending on the different projects you're working on. You may be interested in reaching an international audience, or you might be interested in focusing on a local audience. Knowing who you would like to reach can help you to form and communicate your research in the appropriate manner. For instance, if you're interested in engaging with fellow researchers, your language can be much more technical or theoretical than if you're hoping to reach practitioners or the general public. Those populations might not be as familiar with the jargon or terminology. So if you are writing for the general public, you will need to explain unusual terms and phenomena in a clear manner, spending more time explaining what is just commonplace in academia. If you're looking at a particular local phenomena or case study and you'd like to reach an international audience, the relevancy of your research needs to be clearly articulated. You would need to ask yourself, why would someone, say in Reykjavik, Iceland, be interested in your article? Local
Mình
case
muốn đạt được cái điều gì trong cái bài báo của mình. Vì vậy mà một cái bài báo thường nó có rất là nhiều cái màu sắc. Ở đây mình đang thực hiện một cái bài báo về là bài báo nghiên cứu so sánh đối chiếu chẳng hạn. Và cuối cùng thì mình phải đặt câu hỏi là cái cách mà tốt nhất làm thế nào để mình đạt được cái đối tượng khán giả mình định hướng đến là gì?
Based on those overall goals you set at the beginning of your project. The tradition of writing monographs, I thought we would talk a little bit about monographs since the majority of you are coming from humanities and social science. The tradition of monographs is much more prevalent and important for researchers in the arts and humanities and in some of the social sciences. In fact, monographs have always been an essential part of the scholarly ecosystem and the research process within the humanities and social sciences. Dissertations are structured as monographs rather than a collection of articles bookended by an introduction and conclusion, as is the case with STM. Although that tradition is changing a little bit within social sciences. Some find it difficult to determine which writing strategy is best for the project, whether they should write a monograph or they should write a collection of articles. And there is no incorrect answer here. It's just important to understand the differences between the two types of communication and the requirements you're expected to meet in your education and your job. If we look at the monograph and articles side by side, they have some distinct qualities. So monographs are highly specialized work which present an exhaustive exploration of a subject or a theme or a theory or a combination of these elements. In a study conducted by Oxford University Press a couple of years ago, researchers stressed that the act of writing a monograph supports the research process in and of itself, helping researchers to organize and enrich their thinking through its scale and scope as a format, and the freedom it allows to develop interconnected, complex arguments. So writing a monograph is a form of research. Articles, on the other hand, are focused pieces of writing that are looking at one aspect of a larger research project. For example, perhaps one case study from a dissertation or a chapter from a dissertation. The key area where a monograph will differ from an article is in the length. So monographs tend to be somewhere between 70 to 100,000 words, which allows the author to fully examine all aspects of a topic or understand understandings and applications of a theory. So as a writer, you can really spend time exploring things and taking different side roads into a subject. Whereas in an article, that's not the case. You need to really keep the focus tight. As most of you are aware, research articles are becoming the standard method of communicating research findings and assessing the productivity and excellence of researchers. As said, this is a relatively new development in the humanities and social sciences, and it's had a huge impact on publishing. We're also seeing many more co-authored papers, articles with 2 or more authors. This has been, again, a tradition in science, technology, and medical fields, but we're seeing a rise in that in the social sciences and in some humanities as well. If you choose to write an article, there are common structures that authors follow across disciplines. For empirical research, the most common structure used for research articles is the IMRAD model, and it's fairly straightforward. First of all, every paper should have a clear introduction, which I'll discuss more in depth in a moment. And the introduction would contain a review of the literature, if appropriate for your subject area. And as most of you will know, literature reviews are standard practice in the arts and humanities and the social sciences. However, some do prefer to create a separate section for the literature review. Typically, a literature review should discuss what's already known about the topic of the article, so identify gaps in the current knowledge and present your approach to addressing those gaps. You should be engaging with key thinkers in the area, and the literature should be current, apart from some of those foundational pieces that you may want to mention. The literature review should show how you are building on previous research, showing where your research fits in the wider body of literature. It's basically you staking a claim. A methods section should provide details of your research process, the techniques and tools that you're going to use. You should be very specific about your process and the data that you're using. For example, if you conducted interviews, you should let the reader know how many interviews you conducted, what questions you asked. The questions can be included in an appendix. Why you chose to interview subjects. For instance, what these interviews will bring to the research. For other types of data collection, we need to know what your methods were, how long you observed, how frequently you tested, how you quoted qualitative data, and so forth. If you used an existing data set, we need to know that as well. And if you used a variety of methods, you should discuss them separately. So the interview should be discussed in one section, surveys in another, experiments in another, etc. In this section, you should be extremely clear about the protocols that you've followed, especially if you are dabbling a little bit in biomedical research. Next, you have the results section where you present your findings and the data that you've collected. In this section, you'll visually present the data in charts and tables if appropriate, and share your anonymized quotes from your research subjects if you interview people. Share observations from experiments or ethnographic research, present images or maps, etc. If you're using anyone else's data or images, you must obtain permission and fully cite them in the paper. And you should do that before, obviously, you submit your paper. Next, you have the discussion section where you would analyze your findings and discuss the significance of the data, or in the case of null results, the lack of significance of the data. Some create a separate section for the analysis. It's up to you and the journal you're submitting to in terms of how you structure it. I suggest just following the common practices in your field. And then you want to tie it all up with a conclusion, which would highlight the main points of your article. Now, for more theoretical work, the structure is more fluid, as the paper will be an examination of ideas or texts or images. However, structure is just as important in these types of articles, if not more so. The discussion should be divided up in a logical manner, either by themes or schools of thought or historical markers or whatever makes sense for your particular research. And it should always include an introduction and conclusion as well. Oh, there was a little bit of animation there, apologies. And here's an example of a paper that is using a version of the IMRAD model. So if you look at the list of contents on the left-hand side that I've circled, you'll see that each section corresponds to the introduction, the methods, results, discussions, and conclusion. They've combined the results and discussion into one section, which is perfectly fine. There is flexibility in the structure. You just want to make certain to include all of these different elements in the article in a logical sequence. And then we have an example from a more theoretical paper by one of my favorite writers, actually. They've divided the paper into clear sections based on themes. And the last section is structured further with subtitles such as displacement pressures and resistance to displacement. So even though you have these nice structures, you can still have those subtitles within the section to help authors follow along. So I said I'd like to focus a bit on the introduction because it's especially important that you create a strong introduction. The introduction lays the groundwork for the entire paper and is often the only part of the paper people will read carefully. In terms of peer review, often editors, especially those editing really large journals, will carefully read the introduction and then they just skim the rest of the article to decide whether the article is a good fit in terms of content and quality. So again, it's incredibly important that you create a strong and well-structured introduction. So it would be about 2 to 3 pages that establishes the research question or problem you're exploring, provides a clear thesis or argument, which is easy to see and understand. So make sure your argument does stand out. Many people tend to bury it in the middle of a paragraph on the second page, but you want it to be prominent and easy to find. As you see with this paper, they place the main argument in the second paragraph just after they provided the problem and the background to the research. The introduction also should provide a literature review if that's standard in your field. But as I mentioned earlier, many times the literature review tends to be separate in its own section. You should also provide an outline of the structure of your paper, letting readers know what they can expect. I've called it a roadmap here. So again, if you're doing empirical research, you would want to clearly indicate the methods or theory section, your results or findings, a discussion, and finally conclusion. If it's a theory paper, you would want to kind of give the outline of how you're approaching that as well. But do keep in mind, some journals and disciplines require very clear structures with simple headings for their papers, such as the example here where they clearly label the different sections in the paper. So a roadmap in this case would not be quite as important. Just review the papers in your field and in the particular journal you're planning on submitting to see what their standard approach is. So time for another poll. Let's go back to Mentimeter. I'd like to hear from you. Which one of those sections would you feel most comfortable writing today? And let's just include the literature review as a part of the introduction. So are you most comfortable writing an introduction, a method section, the results, discussion, or conclusion? It's very mixed. So it looks like methods and results are the 2 sections people are most comfortable with. And perhaps it's because that's more reporting in a sense, just telling exactly what you did and what the results were. A few more on the introduction. Yeah, methods seem to be where people are most comfortable so far. Somebody's comfortable, a couple people are comfortable with all the sections. Yeah. Fantastic. Great. See if It loads one more time. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so it's, again, it does look like the method section is the area where people feel most comfortable, followed by introduction and results there. Great. Thanks. Let's go back to the presentation. There we go. So in terms of the writing process, this is a fairly straightforward and useful strategy to follow. It's a little bit thinking about the building blocks of your article and treating each of them separately and then marrying them together. So if you have visuals, whether they be photos or maps or charts or tables, it's a good idea to start with formatting and preparing those. Frankly, it's the easiest part of the process, so it's a nice warm-up for the writing process. In terms of images, you do need to check on the formatting and resolution requirements with the journal that you're planning on submitting to, because they'll be very specific about what they're needing. In terms of writing, the literature review is the natural starting point. This is where you will display your understanding of the literature in the area and the work that has been done before you, the different schools of thoughts or themes, and where you're making a contribution. It is the foundation of a paper. After providing that review, you'll then present your research, first thoroughly describing the methods that you used before presenting the results. And these sections really should be in dialogue with each other. A reader should understand how you ended up with the results you're presenting. It shouldn't come as a surprise when they get to the results section. Next, you'll write up the discussion and conclusion. Only after you finish the body of the paper, do you go back and write the introduction. Now, some people, like myself, like to start with the introduction. It's a bit of a warm-up for some people, and that's absolutely fine, gets you started. But I would suggest that you go back and do a rewrite of the introduction after you finish the rest of the paper so that it clearly provides an overview of the finished article and highlights your contributions, because the writing process tends to kind of reveal different aspects that you might not have been aware of when you were doing the research. As you're writing, you might have some insights that you didn't have before. So it is important to go back and revise that introduction if you started with that. And then after you've finished your paper, you need to write your abstract and your title, as well as prepare the references and bibliography. Again, if you've created a bibliography earlier in the process, that's fine, but it's essential that you review the bibliography and the references in your paper to make sure that you've included everything, and that if you have removed a reference, that you also update the bibliography to reflect that. And here are a few things to focus on when you're writing and editing. First of all, I'm going to start on the right-hand side of the slide. Some journals have a preference for either British English or American English. So you want to make sure to check before you submit and amend your paper to match the journal preferences. If you're writing for an academic journal, then the language should be academic. You can use very technical language. It shouldn't be lay language. However, if it is an academic journal that's also targeting practitioners or the broader public, you may want to adapt your language so much. So as I said earlier, if you're using technical terms, you may want to take a moment to explain those technical terms. And you may think about how you're engaging with theory and that sort of thing. For some people, it's much more difficult writing for the general public, and it takes some practice, but usually just a few simple adjustments will be enough. And really keep in mind, it's not about dumbing down the research when you're writing for the general public. Rather, it's about making the research accessible to more people. Now, if you're unsure about whether or not you should be writing in very technical language, or if you should be writing in more accessible language, just take a look at the journal that you're planning on submitting to and see how others have presented their work to give you a sense of the type of language you should be using. Now, sentence structure is another area where writers can get into trouble, especially when writing in another language. And believe me, I have to write in Swedish quite often, and my sentences are a mess. It's a good idea to keep sentences relatively short. And when I was teaching, I usually recommended to people about 2.5 lines on a page, because when the reader gets to that third line, they begin to lose track of the topic of the sentence, what was written before. And varying the lengths of sentences can be really effective because it creates a bit of rhythm to the writing. So try mixing the lengths of your sentences, and then after you've finished a section, read it out loud to see how the text flows. And lastly, on this topic, try to avoid using complex sentences unless it's absolutely necessary. So I mean a couple things by complex sentences. One is sentences written in the passive voice, where you start with the object of the action instead of the subject doing the action. So sometimes the passive voice is required, such as in a method section where it's common to write, the research was conducted. So you see what that was, that's a passive voice, rather than saying I conducted the research would be an active voice. So again, sometimes it is necessary, but you just want to make sure to mix it with the active voice. The same is true for sentences that have many clauses in them. It can be confusing to follow the point the writer is trying to make if they have a lot of subclauses in a sentence. So just keep in mind, simplicity is key. The goal is to make the manuscript as easy to read and understand and enjoy. One last point on the manuscript and writing process, and now I'm moving over to the left-hand side. I cannot stress enough how important it is to have as many people as possible read and comment on your work throughout the writing process. And you have many resources that you can draw upon to receive good critical feedback. First of all, you have your local network. So if you're a student, you have your PhD committee, or if you're faculty, you have your colleagues. And you want to find those colleagues who will give you tough, detailed feedback, who will tear your paper apart with the goal of making it better. Now, it's also important to have those really kind, supportive colleagues who pat you on the back and say, great job. But to get your paper in the best possible shape, you need those who will give you critical feedback. And don't forget to reciprocate. It's all about community. Now, regional and international conferences are also a great place to share early versions of your work and get that feedback. And one of the positive outcomes of the past couple of years is that conferences have become a bit more accessible as they've moved online. And even now that conferences are starting to be run in person, they tend to have hybrid options. So do try and participate in conferences if you're able, because they provide an opportunity to receive feedback from researchers outside of your current network. So you might get new perspectives on your research. Preprint servers are also a great place to share earlier versions of your work. And we're seeing a growth of preprint servers in a variety of subject areas. So preprint servers started kind of in physics and mathematics with arXiv back in the 1990s. But now we've seen the rise of preprint servers for other areas. So for instance, for the social sciences, there's SocArXiv, which is all for the social science, where you can post early versions of your work. Now, you can also post early versions of your work on academic networking sites and sometimes receive really great feedback there as well. And then lastly, if you have the chance, I recommend setting up a writing group at your institution, or if you're working in a particular area, you might think about setting up a writing group across institutions with other people working in that area. So as a grad student, I was involved in a writing group that was set up for researchers that were working within topics within law and society studies. And it was comprised of researchers at all stages of their career and across a number of disciplines. And each month we would meet for lunch and review one person's paper. And it was a great initiative for a number of reasons. First of all, for the PhD students, it demystified the writing process a bit because we could see senior academics with plenty of publishing experience struggle with communicating their research. So it helped us accept that communicating research in a clear manner is really challenging, no matter how much experience you have. It was also helpful to receive feedback from people outside of our discipline, as the comments usually were about how we communicated our ideas. And then lastly, and perhaps most importantly, it tends to keep you on track. If you know that you will have to share your paper in the next section, you're going to commit to finishing a draft. So again, I recommend this as a tool to help you with your writing process. The goal here is to get your paper in the best possible shape you can before you submit it to a journal for peer review. Right, so that's the end of that section. Some key takeaways here, and I just thought I'd pause to see if there's any questions on the points that we just covered. Anything on the structure of the article, the writing process? Okay, we'll move on to the next section then. We will have time at the very end of the session as well for questions. So if something comes up in the next few moments, you can just put it into the chat and we'll try and get it at the end of the session. Right, so next we're going to focus on writing an abstract. So why are abstracts important? Well, the main thing is that they provide an overview of the paper with sufficient detail to allow someone to decide whether the article would be of interest. So for editors, abstracts are important because it's the first part of the article that they'll look at to see if the subject matter is relevant to the journal. If the abstract is poorly written with bad use of language and grammar, it tends to be an indication of a low quality paper. If the abstract lacks structure, it could be an indication of a disorganized paper. A poorly written and poorly structured abstract is rarely a summary of a high quality article. For peer reviews, they make decisions on whether they should review a paper based on the abstract. So if the abstract doesn't accurately capture the content of the article, they may decline to review the paper because they think that the research is not in their area. So first impressions matter. If the abstract is poorly written, it may influence their opinion of the article in the end. Now, for indexing services, people don't tend to think about this, but for indexing services, if the abstract is poor quality with unclear language, it may cause the indexing service to make mistakes with indexing the overall article. And then lastly, for authors, if the abstract is unclear and poorly written, it's likely that they will not click through to read the article because they'll assume the article is also poorly written. Abstract styles do tend to vary somewhat, but there are a few elements that you'll find in most abstracts. So many start with one or two sentences providing the context or the background to the research. And this is usually followed by a sentence stating why this research is of interest, why you're researching the subject, and what your aims are. And then next, you'll want to put it in a wider context. What are the key issues that you're exploring, and how will the research make a contribution or an intervention into the subject area? In many cases, the authors will add a couple lines about the research process and the methods that they've used. And then lastly, there's a sentence or two about the findings. However, this varies quite a bit. In some disciplines, you'll find an explicit statement about the research findings in the abstract, whereas in other disciplines, it's a bit vague, especially with theoretical work. They won't be quite as explicit about the actual findings. So I thought we would take a look at an abstract just to see how they include all of these different parts. So first of all, they present the context there, a little bit of a background there. And then they've included the objectives for the research. And this is followed by the methods. And then they present their findings. And lastly, they have the intervention. And this sequence actually is my preference. I think it's nice to end with a bang. Like, what is the intervention you're making with the research? I think it's a nice way to end an abstract. But again, you can mix these around a little bit, although I would say that it's a good idea to start with the context and objectives. But the last three areas you could probably mix up a little bit. But as you see, that abstract is quite short. Once you know what journal you'd like to submit to, you want to check the instructions for authors for guidance on abstracts. Most will have word limits, usually about 250 to 300 words per abstract. And then some prefer structured abstracts where it's broken into different sections. So if we look back here, those different sections here, context, objective, methods, findings, and intervention, they'll have similar categories where the author would add 1 or 2 lines under each of those categories. And then when you're writing your abstract, again, you want to think about who you're hoping to reach. You may use different language if you're hoping to reach practitioners or the general public as opposed to an academic audience. And during the peer review process, you're likely to revise your paper. And if you revise your paper, you want to make sure to go back and review your abstract because you might have made some significant changes in your paper that need to be reflected in your abstract. And remember, the abstract should be a clear overview of the research, so not too much information or detail. And then lastly, I've mentioned this already, but just to stress, make sure the abstract is easy to read and understand, because often this is the only part of your paper that peer reviewers, editors, and potential readers will look at to see if the paper is of interest. And again, if the abstract is poorly written, then many will assume that the paper itself is as well. You don't want to give a bad first impression. So a few things to avoid with your abstracts. First, avoid any kind of in-depth descriptions of your research. You're just not going to have the space to do it. But at the same time, you want to avoid being vague and miss out key information, such as the method section. You want to avoid using any jargon or unusual terms. And also, you don't want to really use any acronyms or anything like that in the abstract. It's again, too short to explain any of that information. And then abstracts should not include references. References should just be in the main body of the paper. Right, so that is the end of the abstract section. Any questions on abstracts? I see a question about the slides. We will share the slides after the webinar, if you haven't already received them. I believe we sent out slides that are written in Vietnamese as well, so a little bit easier for you. Oh, there it is. Great. Wonderful. Okay. We'll move on to the next bit. Sometimes people call it the abstracts, titles, and keywords, the marketing that you do for your paper. And I'll explain why that is. So the title is usually the first part of your article that people will see. And there's a lot of content in the world, as we all know. So when people are searching for relevant material, you want to make sure yours stands out. A title should be relatively short. We usually suggest 16 words or less. And I would probably say less is more in this case. The fewer words, the better in an abstract. The title is not a sentence, though it may contain a sentence. For instance, it's not uncommon to feature a quote as a part of a title, especially with ethnographic research or research where you've done a lot of interviews and that sort of thing. But if you do use a quote, you need to have a subtitle that explains exactly what the article is about. But even if you use a quote and a subtitle, you still should keep the total number of words to 16. Your title should be specific and capture what the article is about. The language needs to be absolutely clear. It's fine to be a bit creative with the title, but it shouldn't include jargons or obscure language. Again, you don't have the room to explain that. It needs to be the simplest description of the article and focused on the findings, not on the methods. Now, the only exception to this would be if the methods were an integral part of the overall work, such as ethnographic research. Sometimes it's nice to kind of indicate that type of study. Now, along with your title and abstract, you'll often be asked to provide keywords for your article. And these help with indexing and improving the visibility of your article with search engines. So the first thing you should ask yourself is, how would I search for this article in Google Scholar? What words would I use? And when you're choosing your words, you want to find a balance between too general and too obscure. If the words you choose are too broad, the article will be lost in the search results. Likewise, if you're using a very uncommon term, that might also be problematic because people won't necessarily use that term when they're searching for your article. As with the title, you needn't include terms referring to your methods unless you think people might search for your work because of the methodology you've used. Now, once you have some keywords, you want to test them out in Google Scholar to see what results you get. Are they what you would expect? And if so, you're done. Great. You did a great job in the first round. But if they aren't what you expect, then you need to test different words that capture the type of research you've done and test those words out as well. And just keep trying until you start seeing the type of results that you would expect. And if you're struggling to come up with words that you think would be useful or quite good, try using Google Keyword Planner, which ranks the words by the number of times people have searched for that term in the previous month. So let me show you what this looks like. This is the Google Planner. So if you see here, they've searched for homelessness policy, and then it shows how many times people have looked for homelessness policy as a search term in Google. And so they've got 100 to 1,000 searches in the previous month. And then it shows other terms that are similar below and the kind of the amount people have searched for those terms. So you can use this as a way to test the popularity of terms and the effectiveness of the terms that you're using. So one of the things that we've learned from website designers and marketing professionals is the importance of search engine optimization, which is often referred to as SEO. So search engine optimization leads to greater visibility of your work when people are searching in databases or Google or other indexes. And you want to take every opportunity you can to make it easier for people to find your work and to ensure that your article is showing up at the top of the list rather than on page 20 on the Google results. So first of all, make sure to cite your previous publications wherever you can. If you have a personal website, list all of your work there, full citations with the DOI. And the same is true with institutional websites and academic networking sites and social media. And if appropriate, cite your previously published work in your current article. The more places your work is cited, the higher it will fall in search results. That's to say that the more inbound links to your article, the more search engines such as Google will value and highlight your content. Now, we just discussed the importance of keywords for search engines. Keywords should be included in your titles and your abstracts. So for the title, it's wise to feature the keyword in the first 65 letters of the title, as it helps with the indexing with Google Scholar. And then for abstracts, you should have the main keywords within the first 230 characters. Why is that, you may ask? Well, Google's meta description. So when you get that, the search results, the descriptions that you have under the main title of the page that you can see in the search list, those can only be 230 characters long. So as people are just kind of browsing through the results in Google, they'll be able to, kind of happen upon those keywords that will lead them to click through and open up the article. So I thought we would do just a little brief exercise here. And what I'd like you to do is think about a current project you're working on. It can be an article you're writing for a seminar, or it can be an article that you're getting ready for publication. And what I'd like you to do is just take a couple minutes and try and identify 3 to 5 words for your research and test them in Google Scholar or another academic database. And when you're finished, submit them via Mentimeter here. So we'll just take about, let's take about 3 minutes and see how we get along with 3 minutes.